Thanks for tuning in to Strength FM. We've got Nicky Boy and I back in action. We're here with Keegan Smith, the owner and founder of the Real Movemen Project and ex-S&C coach for Sydney Roosters. Welcome.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
No worries, a pleasure.
Yourself?
Yeah, beautiful. So Keegan's been a big mentor for myself. Being involved with the Real Movemen Project, like personally, I've had massive growth, and I know the Real Movemen Project is making big change, not just in Australia, but worldwide, with coaches and facilities opening up. Keegan, do you want to start with giving us a bit of rundown of your history and how you started the Real Movemen Project and what it's about?
Yeah. So I guess I was working in strength and conditioning, which was kind of the best I could have hoped for, maybe coming out of exercise science, like studying exercise science in Wollongong. Everyone was sort of told, yeah, there's no jobs in sport, but you might get work in insurance, or you might get work in selling medical parts or something like this, or you can do physio or you can do PE. But basically the message was that the degree that I'd chosen to do was not going to be that valuable and I could do something else with it. So fortunately, I was one of the few who went into sports. I got some experience there while I was at uni, and then ended up working with Parramatta Juniors, and then London, and then in France, and then eventually the Roosters. And, you know, all through that journey, as well as my travels, I was sort of always felt like there was something else that I was meant to be doing. And there was another process I was meant to be sort of working towards. So when I was at the Roosters, I started to do some education stuff for coaches. I kicked it off with Corey Bocking, actually. He's a guy who has done a lot of education work for Fitness First in Australia and worked with a lot of different cricket teams and athletes and such. And he'd done a lot of that stuff. So he helped me to get started, and we presented together a thing called Strength Essentials. And that's where I met Paddy Lane and a bunch of guys who've ended up, working with beyond that. But that's kind of where it started. Was like I was still working in strength and conditioning full time, but sort of thinking about, well, maybe I could do something here privately. And it was also at the time when I was going to become a father. My daughter was on the way, and I was sort of thinking, like, do I want to be, completely vulnerable to the challenges of working in professional strength and conditioning, where if the head coach goes, or if you have a losing season, then, you're very vulnerable, and, you just have to hope that you get picked up somewhere else. So through all those things, it was my heart, and it was also a bit of logic and security. It was like, okay, I want to help people beyond the world of rugby league. And I'd sort of been trying to do that through blogging and then that course and that sort of thing. And I thought, yeah, I think I can make a go of this. And worst case scenario, I could probably get back into footy, because we'd won the 2013 minor premiership and premiership, World Club Challenge, Club Championship. And we did the same in 2014, except for the premiership. But, we'd won pretty much everything we could win there. So I thought, if worst comes to worst, I can probably get a start somewhere again in footy. But I want to have a go at this, see if I can actually run a business and see if I can make an impact beyond footy players. So that's kind of how it went down. I started actually with Drew Slater and Ben Slater. So they'd started a thing called Primal Sydney, and they were sort of doing some cool stuff, just building a brand, basically. Like, they kind of came at it a bit more from that angle. And they were looking to get out of, what they were doing at the time. They kind of had jobs that they weren't super inspired by. So we caught up and did some training, and that turned into a conversation of, okay, like, let's start a new brand. So I moved away from Coach Keegan brand, and we came up with Real Movemen Project together. I think it was more my idea, which is good, because it ended up staying with me. They moved on to other projects, but, we had an awesome time together there for a few months. And Drew, and they've both gone on to be really successful in other projects and work together with Real Movement members with a lot of that stuff too. So, yeah, that's kind of a bit of the story of how Real Movement got started. And gradually over the time, different partners and different experiences. And we've tried, different formats and launched different things. But basically the last 4 and a bit years, Real Movement Project's been my primary passion, and for some of that time, primary income. So I guess it's in the minority of small businesses, in that it's still going after a bunch of years. And yeah, pretty excited to go further with it, 2019 and beyond. So I don't know if that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but yeah, that's kind of the story of the logistics of how Real Movement got started.
Beautiful. And then how would you explain what it's about to people as well? Because when I talk to people about Real Movement Project, it's I explain some of it, but you always do a better job of explaining it than me.
I don't think anyone really understands what it is until they do it. Until you come to an event and you sort of see what it's about. Foundationally, it is, it's athletic development and it's personal development. I think if you sort of simplify it as that, with a kind of a holistic approach around athletic development where everything matters. So yeah, fundamentally, like I've been able to help athletes go to another level. Like that's what got me started. That's why I was able to, people were interested in working with me was because of the results that I had with athletes that I'd worked with and, to some extent maybe with myself. And so, people I think saw those results and then they were interested in what the process was. When you get to the process, yeah, it can get a little bit confusing and probably, that's something that I haven't been great at is sort of like really getting the branding down so that people deeply understand, what it is it's about. But yeah, I mean, all the pieces that we talk about and then why it sort of looks from an outside like it jumps around a lot is because it all matters. Like the breathing matters, the diet matters, digestive function matters, you understanding brain waves and different levels of brain activity, all that stuff matters, building skills and mobility. Like for me, it's all part of a life well lived, and you have to make money. So we have to talk about that as well. So pretty much anything that I think is involved with living a great life is involved, as part of the education, because you have to nail that to an extent. Like if you want to be the best you can be physically and mentally, you have to have some degree of financial stability as well. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to have business experts involved. And from some perspective, like it's a mistake in terms of branding and marketing because it doesn't have a really small niche and a really clearly defined, like over these 12 weeks, you'll understand this one thing really well. I don't really, that approach doesn't really make much sense to me, and it doesn't actually work in practice. Like you can be the expert in neural development and understand, how myelination works and everything about, the brain. But then if you don't understand nutrition, if you don't understand about, electromagnetic pollution, if you don't understand about, training volume and frequency, then it's useless in the real world because you have to put all those things together in the right way for your knowledge of how the brain adapts, to be useful. I guess my role model in that is probably Charles Poliquin. Like he really went broad and he didn't limit himself. He called himself a strength coach, and that's probably a smart thing. But he was so much more than a strength coach. If you hear him speak, some of his last lectures are online on YouTube, speaking at an Italian conference. I don't know if you've seen that one. Have you guys had much to do with Charles Poliquin stuff? Have you been into his materials at all, or what I'm talking about? Yeah,
it's more of his blogs more than any of his interviews.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So he went on to Strength Sensei, later in his career, because of business reasons and challenges that happened with Poliquin Group, which was where his initial work went through. But I would say he's been the most influential guy in the strength world. But he ran courses around, nutrition course. Initially it was Biosignature, and then it had other names. But it's kind of a nutrition course, but then it was like everything that's involved in optimizing body fat. And so, like, I feel like the reductionist thing now, like everyone's trying to make it so simple. It's calories in, calories out, right? And to an extent, that's true. Like if you're a prisoner of war, you get skinny. But practically in the real world, if you have an overload of toxins, then you will have more of a tendency to accumulate body fat. If you have female hormones versus male hormones, you will have a tendency to accumulate body fat in different areas, right? So the difference between a 12-year-old and an 18-year-old is not that they ate different calories. It's that they have a different hormonal profile. In terms of a 12-year-old girl becoming an 18-year-old girl and a 12-year-old boy becoming an 18-year-old boy, it's not about the calories, why their bodies look different at that stage. They could eat the same calories that whole time. They could both have the exact same diet, and they're not going to look the same at 18 years old. So people try to oversimplify a lot of this stuff, especially recently, and they're missing the point. They're wrong because they have a partial truth, and they're holding on to that partial truth so deeply that they're missing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is there was no obesity. There wasn't a diabetes or cancer or heart disease epidemic, a neurological disease epidemic until we started eating and living like we do now. So it's not just about calories. Like calorie surplus is definitely part of the picture, but if it's the only thing you're looking at, then so I mean that's I guess I'm getting on a tangent here, but that thing that Poliquin did, I guess, with bringing in everything that matters to optimizing performance and optimizing human potential, like that was really what he was about. And I think that's how it goes. Like I just, you can't turn your back on soil science if you want to understand nutrition. I think Paul Chek, you know, is probably the other guy, and they probably helped each other a lot. And in a lot of ways, I think they're probably the two most influential guys on how, you know, strength training works today and what people are talking about. I just noticed there's a chicken walking around in the ensuite behind me. They sneak into the house.
I thought you meant here, like through the video. I was about to look behind me.
No, there really is a chicken here. I'm not done. But yeah, that's the thing. Like it all counts. It all matters. And I guess that's the fundamental philosophy. It all matters. It also matters what environment you're in. Nobody is going to be world's best strength coach without being surrounded by other people who are really working hard in that area. And so I think that's been a lot of the power of Real Movement as well, is like bringing together a lot of the most ambitious coaches, mostly in Australia, but a few, you know, around the world, bringing those people together. They've all accelerated their journeys, and a lot of the most influential guys, you know, young dudes in strength and conditioning in Australia, there's a bunch of them who've been connected with Real Movement. And that's something that I'm really proud of, but also something that gives me a belief that the way that we've put this thing together is powerful and makes an impact on people's lives.
What do you think the best way is to be able to spread the knowledge about this? Like you touch on a lot of different things there, but let's just branch it up as nutrition. How do we spread that? Obviously, the Real Movement Project is one way, but how do we then make it almost like an epidemic and let people know that this is?
I think that's the $1 million question, right? Like that's what we're trying to answer.
If you're wondering what's going on, Keegan just the chicken out of his house.
Yeah, sorry, I had to let the chicken out. It was gonna bug me and probably gonna make some noise. So apologies for that. I bet it's the first and last time you have a chicken interrupt your podcast. So how do we get a bigger message out around nutrition? I do believe that you got to have something bigger than I want to look good. For most people, that's not going to be enough. I think you got to have something bigger than I want to be healthy, because I don't think that's immediate enough. And unless you're actually like the doctor says, okay, you're going to die if you don't fix this. A lot of people at that stage, some people at that stage will be like, yeah, okay, I'll eat like a human now. I'll change my habits. I'll change my ways. But we can't really, you know, it doesn't make sense to wait for that. So yeah, what is going to actually cause a major kind of paradigm shift, or, you know, the dominant paradigm to be away from self-harm, where most of what you can pick up on the go are foods that will lead you to an early grave, rot your brain, you know, how do we shift it from that to where you can actually get food that's going to help you to live well? Yeah, it's through demand. How does that demand grow? I think it starts with, you know, a philosophy of living and a passion for something. I think there's a lot to be learned from CrossFit with this, where people become obsessed with getting the movements and being able to, you know, string those kipping muscle ups together and string those, you know, 10,000 snatches together. And as a result, they want to eat well, and they want to understand what needs to be done for that. Now, some of the competitive athletes are training with such high training volumes, potentially enhanced in different ways, and it actually gets away from, you know, what Glassman really wanted. But I think he's done an amazing job. Like, he wants population health change. He loves fitness and seeing who's fittest, who can get through the most work in, you know, different modalities. But I think people falling in love with, you know, that competition, those movements, that is what is driving a lot of them to, you know, engage with paleo type nutrition. And I think that he's onto a lot of good stuff with what he does. Once you get to the pointy end of competitive sport, it becomes something different, which is not necessarily so relevant to the population, the epidemic of, you know, self-inflicted, you know, disease that we're living through at the moment. So I think it's that, like guys like Chris, I think, you know, if people can be inspired about performance, then the nutrition is almost like, I don't really want to, you know, eat this stuff because it's going to take away from tomorrow's training, or like go and binge drink, for example. I don't want to get smashed on a Friday night, Saturday night, and have a few drinks on Sunday, because I actually want to train hard on a Saturday and I want to recover really well on a Sunday, or get something done on a Sunday. And then, you know, go back at it on Monday. Like that's, I think like people will spontaneously decrease their self-harm habits, their alcohol consumption, stuff like that, if they're inspired towards a target. And some of that is like, you guys, you know, done a lot of powerlifting. Like if you've got that event meet coming up and all the CrossFit competitions and those sorts of things, it's like, well, I'm going to work towards that. Now, powerlifting can be different. If you're not struggling for a weight class, then maybe you eat like shit, because, you know, being as heavy as possible is part of the game for some people. But for the most part, like that's what I think it needs to be. That's the piece, like encouraging people where it becomes normal to have extremely high levels of physical capacity and physical performance. And you want to do the things that take you there, whether that's nutrition, whether that's breathing practices, whether that's mindfulness, you know, whether that's all of these things, like the kind of bed that you sleep on, the kind of shoes that you wear. Like if all of those decisions are made in the lens of, I want to be physically exceptional, then those decisions become easier. And Paul Quinn said it, you know, it's not about discipline, it's about what you love most. If you love abs more than you love donuts, then you choose abs, you know, and it can take a while to change those habits. If you were brought up on donuts, I remember going to the shops with my mom and having 12 cinnamon donuts as a bribe to hang around with her while she was at the shops. You know, like that was a routine for me as a kid. I don't know if it rings any bells for anyone there, but gradually they became more and more the donuts. I think we were less and less interested in doing the shopping with mum, so the 6 became 12 and whatever. But you could easily smash those 12 donuts, which is probably, I don't know how many calories, probably 1,000 calories or 1,500 calories, and you'd still be hungry after it, right? So yeah, you could balance your calories and you could stay lean on a donut diet or whatever. And there's people doing that stuff on YouTube, but you're probably going to have joint replacements. Your brain's probably not going to work, you know, properly. And it's going to be all bad luck when that person commits suicide or is on antidepressants or has an alcohol addiction or, you know, whatever. They're all signs and symptoms of bodies and brains that don't function very well. So I think the modern approach that is most commonly being pushed by fitness professionals today it's such a shame, because the fitness professionals of the past and kind of the old physical culture people, they were putting forward an idea and they were basically revered on the same level as doctors, because it was about how to be as healthy as possible, as virile as possible, with as high vitality as possible, at the same time as being as strong as possible. And it was all one package. Whereas now it's like abs at any cost is kind of the branding of a lot of these people. And they're dismissing everyone who's been knowledgeable of health in the past has believed that food matters, like food choices matter. Whether you look at Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, you know, Celtic medicine, and then through to people like Eugene Sandow, who's on the, you know, the bodybuilding trophies, like to tell those guys, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, what you eat, as long as you get your calories right, as long as you get your macros right. Like those people would headbutt you. Like they would be just completely, you know, they would tell you, please stop talking. Like, please don't share this message because it's doing harm to society. And I think, yeah, like that's where we're at. Like if people can have a bigger driver than just abs and something superficial, then that's, you know, and towards something they love rather than away from something they hate. Like a lot of people think, yeah, I'm probably going to get cancer and heart disease because that's what my parents had and I'm genetically predisposed to it, which is a lot of trouble in itself with epigenetics. And there's, you know, our future isn't dictated to us by our genes. But a lot of times that negative stuff is not strong enough to pull us away from bad habits. Whereas if we actually fall in love with being a ballerina or being a weight category powerlifter or weightlifter or something like that, then you spontaneously get it done. You know what I mean? Is that making sense?
I was just saying, like, while you're talking about nutrition, like you've, I know in the Real Movement Project, you do a lot with the keto diet. And so I wanted you can you talk a little bit more about that and why, why you follow a keto diet, as well as I know along the way, you've copped a lot of stick about it as well. And you've got a lot of haters, you know, with their own opinions. I guess I feel like that's the biggest indication of success. Then you start getting like the haters. How do you deal with those, I guess, adverse people, and when that kind of goes against the message you're trying to preach? How do you deal with that and keep your eyes?
So there's there's two things there. There's keto and then there's haters. So keto diet, I wouldn't say I actually follow a ketogenic diet at the moment. I think ketogenic diet is measuring your ketones regularly and making sure you're in ketosis, which some would consider 0.5, some would consider 1 millimolar. If you're getting those readings, then you're in ketosis and therefore it's a ketogenic diet. If you're looking for the therapeutic effects, if you have epilepsy or Alzheimer's or those sorts of things, and a doctor might prescribe a ketogenic diet where you keep your ketones above 3 millimolar is like that highly therapeutic ketogenic diet that's been studied and proven brain, improvement in neurological conditions and brain function for those sorts of people. But most people don't have those diseases, at least at a diagnosed level. If there is some degree of brain deterioration present in probably most of us with all the stresses and challenges that are going on, and most people will have some degree of brain fog or neurological symptoms. But so I don't follow a ketogenic diet. I do believe that you should get into ketosis reasonably regularly. So you can do that through fasting. You can do that through just having lower carbohydrate intake, but you might have more protein. Like I generally have more protein than what a strict ketogenic diet would have. And there's lots of different variations and subtleties around the ketogenic diet, but it seems as though there are benefits to going in and out of that mode. And I think that's something that we should do and we should have done. In the past, it was kind of forced on us through starvation or just through having to get up and move for the day and not get anything until dinner time. Like if you're doing that kind of strict intermittent fasting or longer durations, then you're going to get some ketone production. Even like body composition athletes, when they're in a calorie deficit, they could be eating quite a lot of carbohydrate, but because they're not meeting their caloric needs, and if they train hard, they can actually have quite high ketones. My wife often has high ketone levels, even if she's having quite a decent amount of carbs because she's breastfeeding as well. So like there's different things that go on with the body that cause those ketones to be produced. And there's more and more research that those ketones have powerful positive effects. The research goes back hundreds of, like at least 100 years. And then, all the way back to ancient Greece, they were using it for epilepsy and things like that. So people who have challenges with brain function, it should definitely be the go-to, in my opinion. A lot of people, now you can do it exogenously, so you can prove it. And prove it is the name of the brand. This is the thing that kind of brought on all the haters. So you can now get into ketosis directly by taking a beta-hydroxybutyrate salt, which is one of the 3 main molecules that your body will start to produce when you have a deficit of glucose. Your brain can either run on glucose or it can run on ketones. So if there's a shortage in glucose, your liver will start to produce ketones. So rather than having your liver do that, you can actually just ingest them. Most guys now in the biohacking type scene and in ketogenic diet scene have experienced exogenous ketones. So there's esters and there's salts. I actually heard about the salts through Tim Ferriss and Joe Rogan 2016, and I was doing ketogenic diet at the time, and I thought this is very interesting. This could be really big because I know the ketogenic diet can be really hard for people to do. So if you can just get the benefits without having to have as much discipline, like this could be really interesting. I wonder where this will go. So I tried to get them. I couldn't get them. Eventually I got some, and I was like, yeah, this is probably going to be really big. And so I became part of the company. It was a network marketing model. It is a network marketing model. So that lends itself to, especially when it's something new, people need to be educated on it. Otherwise, they're not necessarily going to try it. So over the last 3 years, there's been more and more research come out about exogenous ketones. Oxford University, who's a fairly good reputation academic entity, they've done a lot of the research around it. They've used a lot of the ketone esters. The US military for Navy divers and sort of special forces is another area. I know a lot of snipers and high-level military guys have played around with them. Dr. Ken Ford, who is in the Science Hall of Fame, he's done lots and lots of podcasts speaking to the world's best leaders on that. So if you go to STEM Talk Radio, which I think is the number one sort of science podcast, he speaks with a lot of experts on it. So there are a lot of smart people who are interested in exogenous ketones. The word, it's not something definitive. As Dr. Ken Ford says, look, if I wait for the research to be definitive long-term for humans, I'm going to be dead before it comes out. He's making a best case, judgment based on what he can see. He's using exogenous ketones and he's continuing to research, sometimes esters, sometimes salts, depending on what wants to be done. But I use the ketone salt still most days. I don't talk about it. I haven't been talking about it as much lately. But yeah, like that's still, it's important business for me. It's important. I think it's an important product that will become very mainstream. I actually saw on Poliquin's website yesterday that he produced his own ketone salts. You can buy them off his website. Now, I'm not sure. There's a lot of subtleties when you come to product and stuff, but it's probably not for this conversation. But I do think that ketone salts will continue to be more, widely used, widely recognized. Dr. Rhonda Patrick's using them before, her podcasts and things like that. Like, these are not stupid people that are experimenting with this stuff. And there were some very stupid people. Well, actually not. They're actually smart people who were very critical of me for putting the word out on this. I was, the post that got people really shitty was a 60-hour fast. So you do 60 hours where all you do is take ketones. And over the course of, 2.5 days, you basically take in like 500 something calories. So it's a massive calorie restriction, but you don't tend to feel like shit in the way that you might if you had 500 calories of something else. It's 500 calories predominantly from the exogenous ketone, the ketone salt. So people tend to feel like euphoria. They don't feel hungry and they get through the longest. It's not a fast really, but it's, something along those lines. It's not a true fast because you're taking in some calories, but you feel great. Sometimes I've trained through it like twice a day, training hard, and you get shredded because you're taking 500 calories and like you can expend 3,000, 4,000 calories without feeling shitty. If you do that, then obviously you're going to drop a significant amount of fat. So like I put up photos. It was the leanest I've ever been. It was fun for me. I like reporting on my experiments. Like that's pretty much what I do, what I brand around. Like I live all the things that I share. And people got really angry saying like, this is lies and whatever. I think they're wrong. I think the science is there to show that they're wrong. But yeah, it was tough. Like there was definitely people I've worked with Real Movement as well. And people like that I consider friends, were sort of like putting the slipper in a little bit as well with it. Like, is what it is. I'm not ashamed. I don't think I made a bad decision. If it turns out 10 years from now or 5 years from now that I did make the wrong decision with it, like I'll live with that. But for now, the research and the evidence and my own experience and, thousands of people that I've given them to, lots and lots of life-changing stories. Like I'm happy with the decision that I made. I'm still a little bit undecided about how publicly I want to brand around it, but I'm obviously not too worried about it because I've just spoken about it with you guys for 10 minutes. But that social media hate thing is pretty full on, pretty real. And there's some interesting TED Talks and thought going on around that. Like it was tough for me. There's now been, there've been a lot of people commit suicide. There've been a lot of people completely lose their shit when they've been flooded with hate on Twitter and stuff like that. Like, it's like that cyberbullying, cyber bashing thing. It's so easy for someone just to spend 30 seconds putting something stupid in their keyboard that they don't really understand anything about. And when that's multiplied by hundreds and thousands, people it can really hit people hard. So, it was a good experience from that perspective as well. Like just dealing with that. I did kind of go into like a bit of a meltdown physically after that. Like my immune system kind of shit itself. But I had been training really hard, but I think that the stress of that thing probably took me a few months, if I'm honest, to get over. It's hard to say which part was psychological and which part was physical. But yeah, Nick saw me around that time. Like I'd sort of just been going through all that sort of when he was over there with us in Spain, and I'd obviously did my best to do well in Spain, and I enjoyed that event and I was okay, but I struggled for a while after that. So that whole time I was with the Roosters for the Premiership last year, I was like really couldn't get my body and mind sort of together. So it was tough being around them at that time, but I think, it helped me a lot. So I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be with them during the Premiership run, but it was, it wasn't my best time. And I've been sort of rebuilding through the farm and through my own training, over the last, say, 4 months, gradually picking myself up. after that, I don't know to what extent. I put it a lot more down to the way I'd been training and some of the things I experimented with my food. But it probably was a reasonable part of it as well. Some of that and some other, personal stuff that was going on mentally. Like, you can't separate physical and mental stress, emotional stress. Or in a lot of ways, I think the emotional stress is worse. I don't know if you guys have experienced this, but if you're mentally feeling like you're way off, or something's like really got you down with its, financial troubles or girlfriend or whatever, your training can really go to crap, and you can feel a lot worse and weaker than if you just did too many deadlifts. So
yeah, that was me.
You experienced that?
That was me before Spain. I was like hating work and stuff. I was in a down spot and training was going shit at the same time. So
yeah. And then your mind changes and all of a sudden your recovery capacity is like through the roof, right? Like you feel like I don't know why, but I can just handle whatever I do right now. I'm just excited about it. And sometimes that's going towards a meet or going towards a set event. It gives you that energy as well, right? Because you're like, you have to go, and so you do, and body gets on with it. That's probably all I got to say about the haters and all that stuff.
Yeah. And then while we're talking about Spain, there was one thing I did want to ask you, which I guess it ties into what you were talking about before about the epigenetics. There was something you were talking about in Spain, which I thought was really interesting, which was how someone's health, obviously of both the mother and father, can impact generations 2, 3, 4 down the track. Would you be able to touch on that and say, with this current state of self-inflicted diseases you're talking about, what potential implications are generations down the track from here?
Yeah, this is a big one, Nick, and it's probably something that some people don't want to hear, but the choices that you're making all through your life are going to impact generations to come. And a lot of people don't really think about their health. One of the triggers to think about health is when people realize they're infertile, and they get to the point where it's like, I've been silly since I was 15 to 30 and taking drugs and, eating badly and drinking all the time. And then at 30, you decide, I want to have a kid now. And, 2 people have been living like that, realize, okay, we can't have kids. So this is like, it's nature's stop sign. Like, it's a huge thing of like, well, that's the ultimate, like, no, you don't, your genetics don't get to go on because your body is not in the state to be able to go to another generation. And that's, it's a huge thing. And it's, I think, something that we should really be aware of. Like, fertility medicine is one of the fastest growing areas of medicine. And that's nature's stop sign. Like, that's telling us you're breaking too many rules and now you don't get to go on. So the eggs that, my wife has used to make our children, she had those when she was a fetus in her mother, right? So the quality of those eggs is determined by her mother and before that. So that's why your grandmother's health is a really big determinant, especially on your mother's side. How healthy she was is probably a pretty good indicator of how much genetic momentum you received. So in animal husbandry, animal breeding, people understand this very clearly. If you're a dog breeder, if you're a horse breeder, you're breeding thoroughbred racehorses, etc., like, the runt is the runt. And if you breed them too close together, if you don't feed them well, etc., if the structures aren't there, if the bone structures aren't there, if the behavior is off, if they just get sick, if they die young, etc., like, all those things determine whether you breed that animal or you don't breed that animal. Now, it's, I guess the Nazis had ideas around this stuff, and that's probably why people don't want to talk about it. But in a lot of cultures, they knew that if the parents lived correctly according to the values and the philosophies and the things that their culture understood to be important, then the children would be viable. They would have healthy offspring that would have, great health and be able to pass that on to the next generation. And, that knowledge, that way of thinking has been lost massively from, Western culture. I don't know many people who are thinking about making decisions based on the future, the health of their grandchildren. Like, my daughter now, she has all the eggs that she's ever going to have, and the health of those eggs is determined by, my wife's health at the time that, she was conceived. And the father, even though we only have that one little swimmer that plays a part, it actually has a huge role to play in this as well. So the health of the father at the time of the inception plays a big role as well. So yeah, like I can't help but look at this, like the teeth, the jaw structure, the jawline, behavioral stuff, bone mass, bone girths, all these sorts of things are indicators of quality of breeding. I think it's in Muslim culture or in certain parts in the Middle East, that's what you do. You look at the woman's teeth, and you, based on the teeth, you make the decision of whether they're going to be a good partner or not. So this kind of stuff that we take for granted with animal breeding and is known through lots of different cultures has been lost for the most part in modern times. So yeah, I think again, Chris, is like it's like values and goals and what you're working towards. Like everybody wants to have healthy kids. Nobody wants to have their kids be sick or not live longer than they do or not have healthy kids. But there's all these other things that pull us towards, self-harm and more destructive habits and live for the moment and you only live once, and this kind of philosophy of like just go out and go wild because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't buy into that philosophy. It's the Stoic philosophy, versus the Epicurean. Like that debate's been going on for centuries, millennia. The Stoics believe, build for the future, do it for the long term, make tough decisions today and tomorrow will be good. That kind of thing, don't get wrapped up in your successes and that sort of that way of thinking. That's the battle that's going on. The consumerist, culture and the capitalist economy really wants us to be like, you only live once, just go buy it, like just put it on your credit card, like it's all fine, it'll all work out in the end. Whereas the Stoic is like, no, well, like if I keep saving a little bit, if I live frugally, like I will always be comfortable and my children will live, comfortably and well and for generations to come. So yeah, I think that way of thinking, if you're interested in going more into that, Weston A. Price's work is a great place to go. And I got into that through Paul Check. But, Sally Fallon and Weston A. Price Pottinger Foundation, Pottinger's work as well. It goes into a lot of this stuff of bone structures and breeding and generations of nutrition. And Pottinger did experiments with cats where you could see if you gave a cat pasteurized food for successive generations, if the food had been heated and didn't have enzymes and whatever things are there when the food hasn't been heated, they would become sterile within 4 generations. Their behavior would deteriorate. They'll become sterile. The bone structures would change. And he demonstrated it very clearly because he did generations of kittens. If then after 3 generations they went back onto raw food, it would take, I think, 6 generations to return to full health. So there's a bit of a challenge ahead for us, more than likely, to return to what we could be. But we have such opportunity at the moment. If we chose to invest more of our income into our health and into our nutrition, then we can probably do a lot to regenerate and to improve quite quickly. We spend proportionally less money on food than we ever have in the past because we have all this disposable income, but it's all getting sucked up into other values. So it all becomes like what's important to you, what do you value most? I would rather be able to eat good food and wear the same clothes for the next 5 years, than the opposite, have all the latest clothes and fashion and not eat good food. That's kind of it's what it comes down to. But yeah.
We talked a lot about nutrition today. I think we'll leave it at the nutrition side. I think we'll schedule another podcast to talk more about the training aspect. I think it was very content dense. So I think we'll leave it there. But we normally finish with three questions. So the first one is there a daily habit that you have? I know you're big on habits. Is there a daily habit that you may have that you think is critical for your success, either as a coach or as an athlete, as a father, whatever it might be?
Yep. All your daily habits are who you are. So they're definitely a massive thing. There's a bunch of ones that we work on. I would say reading daily is probably the one that I would like to put forward. If you continue to expose yourself to the greatest minds in history, the greatest thinkers of our time, you're probably going to get better. I believe in that learning by osmosis, and it's even more impactful when you're face to face with people and having conversations and being challenged in that positive way. I think if you can expose yourself to positive content daily, podcasts are cool, audio books are probably a bit cooler, but I still think reading is valuable. Just to have the discipline to do that, to have like the single-minded focus. It's very easy with the podcasts and audibles, which I love and use as well, but it's easy to be doing other things at the same time, and sometimes it doesn't have the same impact. And if you find that you can't really read because your mind wanders, then fix that as well. Like that's probably a really big thing to work on. Like the ability to focus was one of probably the most sacred trait, intention of the ancient Egyptians, and it's coming back around again with mindfulness and all that stuff. Like you need to be able to focus. So yeah, reading, just set a minimum. We talk about it in Real Movement. A lot of guys do a minimum, like 10 pages a day. It takes whatever, depends on which book you're reading. If it's a picture book, then obviously it's not going to take as long, but you know what I mean? So yeah, 10 pages a day, I think is a life changer, Chris. And you think about yourself differently from that position as well when you know you're a reader.
Yeah. I think that kind of ties in perfectly for the second question. What's a book that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, like so many. What would yours be, Nick? What do you?
I like Think and Grow Rich.
Think and Grow Rich, yeah. Think and Grow Rich is a great one for the power of subconscious mind. I actually started reading Silver Method again last night. Silver Method it looks like the introduction to Joe Dispenza's work, which is becoming really popular at the moment, but it's a 3-minute process. So the Silver Mind Method is maybe a good one to look at if you really want to make deep change on a subconscious level. And I feel like that area is something that I would like to explore more, and that makes a ton of sense. Earl Nightingale did a lot of stuff around that. All those guys, yeah. But Silver Mind Method is on the list of books that I recommend. So I'll put that one forward.
Okay. And the last one is there any advice that you would give your previous self, I guess, as embarking, this journey you've been going with the Real Movement Project, and maybe something that, other coaches can learn from as well?
What advice would I give my former self? Probably starting to enjoy the process and take a little bit of pressure off myself occasionally from time to time. And that's probably something that I would like to do more of, have more fun with things, and don't be so uptight and nervous about it. Like there's a dichotomy in all these things, right? Like if you don't place value on it, you don't work hard at things, and you don't kind of stress yourself out to an extent, you would have never opened the gym that you've just opened, right? Like there's those two things, but I think I've probably been a little bit too much on the serious side and not enjoying the wins and celebrating success along the way. So yeah, I'm really diligent now with gratitudes each day. It's probably the thing that everybody's talking about now. It's becomes almost valueless to mention, but I'm still going to mention it, because if you can be thankful that, for the great things that you have, and probably even more than the gratitudes, like I write down my wins each day in the book that I use. You write your wins each day. And that's probably a huge thing. Like recognize that there were wins. You're not going to have the perfect day. Like there's going to be stuff that's going wrong, but there's so much good stuff going on. There's so much opportunity. Like there's a million things that I can think of that I'm grateful for. And there's things that are huge wins that happen each day, and just writing down, oh yeah, like I actually did that today, and that was pretty cool that I did that today. Like that's a step forward, and stopping to acknowledge those things is something that I never did in the past, and always very future focused, and just what's coming next has to be more, has to be bigger, has to be better. Like that is my natural tendency. So pulling that back a little bit, reining that in, is probably a positive thing. If you're too much of like everything's fine and I'm doing everything great, but you're not really doing too much, you probably need to do the other way. Like what did you not get done today, and what do you need to be putting more pressure on yourself? But yeah, that's probably the one that I would leave you with there too. So that's another daily thing as well.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate that you're doing this. I know that Nick has gone after some big stuff, and Chris opened new facility. Like that's freaking awesome, and I love that we've had some contacts there together in the past, and seeing you guys grow and go after it, like that's really what it's all about. So yeah, if you tuned into this and you like it, you should reach out to Chris and Nick, because it takes guts and effort to do what these guys have done. The early stages with this project, but I know it's getting bigger by the day. So yeah, thanks for having me on, guys, and well done.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Keegan. You're a wealth of knowledge, and really excited to see the next few steps of the Real Movemen Project.
Thanks, Chris. Champion.
Cool. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Keegan.